What's going on in Cleveland, Mike?
Yeah, this is the third guy who has said no. Now, Udinski seemed to be a viable candidate, and he had an interview with the Bills yesterday. I won't rule out the possibility that, like Jesse Minter a few days ago, he said no to a second interview with the Browns because he had the Ravens job in his back pocket. We can't rule out the possibility that Udinski believes he's seriously in play in Buffalo, or he just realizes, as a wise man once said, the Browns is the Browns, and he doesn't want to work for the Browns. And the Browns have been perennially dysfunctional since Jimmy Haslam bought the team in 2012. He gets very upset when we call them dysfunctional, so please don't call the dysfunctional Browns dysfunctional. But I think that it could be one of two things. Or the third is he's just content to stay in Jacksonville. Now that he's in the mix and his name has come up several times, he's going to be one of the people next year, if the Jaguars offense continues to play well, who is up near the A-list when it's time to fill jobs. You know, this year it's kind of like, who's this kid? He's 28, 29 years old. Now that everyone's familiar with him, he's in a better position to maybe get a better job next year if he does stay in Jacksonville.
Hey, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And if the Browns look dysfunctional, then maybe they just are dysfunctional. But two teams that are very much so not dysfunctional. They have punched their tickets to the national championship game, the Super Bowl, excuse me. Mike Vrabel and Mike Macdonald, two Mikes. Of which Mike do you think put together a more impressive season this past year?
I mean, both were unexpected, and both, I think, were the product of some smart moves that were made in the offseason and for the Seahawks during the season. The acquisition of Rashid Shaheed, I think, helped them in tremendous ways, helped them secure the number one seed, helped them set the tone against the 49ers. He had a big catch early in yesterday's game, 51-yarder. He didn't become Randy Moss, but he did enough to make a difference for the Seahawks. But both guys took teams where the expectations weren't really all that great. Now, the Seahawks won 10 games last year but missed the playoffs. But they made that dramatic move at quarterback. Geno Smith out, Sam Darnold in. Is Sam Darnold going to play well again? Will he be able to punch through the ceiling that ultimately was parked over his head in Minnesota when we got to week 18 and he got the yips when they could have had the number one seed? And then the playoff game against the Rams was just a total team failure. Would Darnold access a higher level? So John Schneider has a lot to do with what's happened in Seattle. And I think Vrabel and his influence over the roster in New England, that comes together. I think what Vrabel did, slightly more impressive because they were 4-13, 2 straight seasons, and boom, they're back. Like, I hope everyone, especially the folks in Buffalo, enjoyed the time that the Patriots were gone because they've regathered, they've regrouped, and now they're back with a team that looks like it's in position to contend for years to come, especially since Drake May is still younger than Tom Brady was when Brady made his first start for the Patriots in 2001.
So from the Mikes to the Seans, with the losing coaches, obviously. Sean Payton, a lot of questions about the play calling and some of the way he handled that game. His post-game press conference, he talked a little about it, but also a lot about where the players failed. What did you make of Payton's post-game press conference specifically?
Well, it's always difficult to articulate your thoughts immediately after a game when, you know, we always hear coaches say, I got to go look at the tape. I got to look at the tape. And maybe they're just trying to buy time, or maybe they just don't know. It's a deflating experience to have a special season come to a crashing end in a game that you fully believed you were going to win. The big flaw, though, was the decision to not kick the field goal and go up 2 scores. I don't think of games in terms of points. I think of them in terms of scores. And there's a psychology to it. And Sean Payton, one of the smartest coaches in the NFL, and he's sensitive to this. He understands this. You go up 2 scores in that point, and you're up 10-0. You put extra pressure on the Patriots. You put extra pressure on their young quarterback who was in the toughest game he's ever faced. Maybe you're just one play away from a backbreaker, a pick six, a fumble, a bad decision, something that allows the floodgates to open. So I was stunned he didn't take the points and go up 2 scores in that moment. I think that was one of the huge plays, one of the huge moments. And then when his backup quarterback, panicked and threw what ultimately was a backward pass in order to avoid a sack, that gave the Patriots the opportunity to score their touchdown. And then, of course, Mother Nature took over and made it impossible for either team to move the ball in the fourth quarter. All the more reason to take the 3 points and go up 10-0 in the second quarter when the Broncos had their chance. And I think Sean Payton at some point, whether he admits it publicly or just privately to himself, he'll acknowledge that that's on him, that he should have taken the 3 points.
Yeah, it's got to be a decision that's going to keep him up at night for days and years to come. But I do want to look at the Rams side of things. What do you think Matthew Stafford's future holds? Is there a possibility that Matthew Stafford decides to hang it up after this season?
Well, he was asked about it after the game, and he said he's not going to make a decision that commits 6 months of his life 10 minutes after a loss. It's a big commitment to take on a full football season, and he had a back injury that popped up between the end of the offseason program and the start of training camp that had him very limited, and there were real questions about whether he'd be able to go week 1. He's going to be 38 on February 7. And remember last year, it got a little dicey. He didn't like the offer that the Rams had made. They gave him permission to go out and seek a trade. He had teams like the Raiders and the Giants believing he was serious about leaving the Rams. At the end of the day, he squeezed a few million extra out of LA, and it left the Raiders and Giants upset, thinking that, he was never going to leave. And now here we are back in this spot. He had an MVP level season. He may end up winning the MVP award. He's due to make $40 million in 2026. The Rams are going to have to give him a significant raise if he does come back. We could be back in the same spot where we're at the scouting combine and we're constantly looking for information about what Matthew Stafford is going to do and where he'll be next. And it may be harder this time to get teams fully involved because they're going to think, this is just another leverage play against the Rams, and the Rams are eventually going to offer him more, and he's eventually going to stay with the Rams. I can't imagine him walking away after a season like this, especially since the season ended one step short of what would be a second Super Bowl berth for him. I'd be surprised if he doesn't play another year. He's not like a guy who relies upon mobility, although he used it a couple of times yesterday. This is a guy who's got a rocket arm. It's still there, and he can keep going. I think the question is, how awkward will it get between now and March 11 between him and the Rams as it relates to how much the Rams are willing to pay him moving forward? And it's kind of a reward because they got a hell of a bargain this year for what they paid Matthew Stafford and what he gave to the team.
All right, Mike, rather than me have to search your page over and over and over again and tweet you and ask you, I'll just ask you now. You're on our show. I'm a diehard Raiders fan. Everybody knows that. Who the hell's coaching my team? What is going on in Vegas?
Yeah, good question. Look, they need to make something happen there. And Tom Brady, even though the Las Vegas Review-Journal reported in January of 2025 that it's Tom's show now, he managed to avoid the scrutiny and the criticism for the disaster that became the 2025 season. And now he's fully involved in it. When they issued the press release announcing the firing of Pete Carroll, it was in there. Tom Brady is going to work in close collaboration with GM John Spytek. And now Brady is free and clear. School's out for him. His Fox duties are over. So they got to make a good decision about who the head coach is going to be. Joe Brady in the mix. Davis Webb is lurking. He's now available to be interviewed and potentially hired since the Broncos season is over. They got to make a decision about who their coach is going to be. And I thought it was very intriguing over the weekend when Brian Daboll's name finally came up. Because if Brady is going to be the one making this decision, I won't be surprised if he tries to tap into the Patriot way. And Brian Daboll won 5 rings as an assistant in New England. Brady knows him well, and that would be kind of a safe and continuous connection back to his playing days if they would go that route. But that's going to be key, and it's going to be very revealing about Brady's interest. And then the big questions are going to be, and this is true for every team, once the coaching carousel stops, the quarterback carousel spins. Who will be the quarterback for the Raiders in 2026? Because I have a feeling it's not going to be the guy that the last coach wanted to bring in.
We mentioned Vegas. We mentioned the Browns, 2 franchises that still have yet to hire a head coach. How many of those vacancies do you think will be filled this week? And which do you think is the first domino to fall?
Well, the question is whether or not anyone is going to wait until after the Super Bowl for Clint Kubiak. And hey, Tom Brady may have decided yesterday from his perspective in the TV booth watching what the Seahawks did, I'm going to wait for Clint Kubiak. And we've seen that happen before. We've seen teams wait. We've seen the Colts wait, and they thought they had Josh McDaniels, and they found out that they didn't. So that's always a possibility. The longer that these jobs are open, the greater the likelihood that they're waiting for someone to become available. I could see, if the Cardinals are serious about Broncos defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, and I think he was hurt by the fact that teams go out and hire guys who are available and they don't wait for the guys who are still coaching. I could see Vance Joseph's name pick up some momentum, specifically in Arizona. But who knows? Look, the bad teams are always the ones that are back hiring coaches again. And you never can tell whether or not these decisions are going to make any sense. I know a lot of Steelers fans. I'm sitting 100 miles south of Acrisure Stadium, and they were perplexed and dismayed and flabbergasted by the decision by the Steelers to pounce on Mike McCarthy when they could have waited until this week to sit down again with the Rams assistants who were in play there. So I'm not saying the Steelers are dysfunctional, but generally speaking, dysfunctional teams do dysfunctional things. So that's part of the fun of this time of year. You never know what these teams are going to do.
So what's it all mean for Clint Kubiak? Because I feel like Clint's name is constantly brought up for everybody as an option. Where's he end up?
Well, I think it's going to be the Raiders or nowhere. And like Grant Udinski, I think this is the year where, because there was no Ben Johnson, there was no, this is the guy. This is the guy that's definitely going to get a head coaching job when we got into this cycle a couple of weeks ago. Kubiak will be, if he doesn't leave Seattle, he'll be a guy who hovers over the season next year, and people will be saying, and it's all, I don't want to say it's all media driven, but a lot of it is driven by how many shots of the guy in the booth or on the sideline during the games, how much we're talking about the guy. The owners become influenced by that. And the owners, they act like they do wide open searches and they don't know who they're going to hire. I'd say for most of these jobs, the moment they fire a guy, the owner knows who he or she wants to hire. So if Kubiak doesn't end up leaving the Seahawks after this year, he's going to be one of the A-listers as 2026 unfolds, along with Udinski. And, of course, the guy that everybody's going to be talking about is Mike Tomlin in 2026 if he chooses to coach in 2027.
I mean, Mike, Phillip Rivers withdrew his name from consideration from the Bills job. Is that the first time Phillip Rivers has ever pulled out? Are we surprised?
I'm glad you said it. But, well done. And he got the interview. Look, now he's a legitimate candidate. There was a report heading into week 18 that Phillip Rivers could be a candidate for multiple jobs. He ultimately got one interview with the Buffalo Bills, and now he's legitimate. And now the question is, at some point, will he take a job? This reminds me of Josh McCown a few years ago. He was one of the finalists to become head coach of the Houston Texans, even though he had no coaching experience. So what did he do? He went to work as a quarterback's coach. He's been with the Panthers. He's been with the Vikings. And you develop experience that way. Phillip Rivers has no college or pro coaching experience. And I think if he wants to position himself to be an NFL head coach, he needs to be an assistant coach at the NFL level. We'll see if he does it. I know he's coaching high school football, and he's got one of his many kids playing for him. But that will be, I think, the next step for Phillip Rivers if he's serious about becoming an NFL head coach. But here's the reality. We rarely see franchise quarterbacks become head coaches because, number one, they don't need the money. Phillip Rivers has made upwards of $260 million in his career. And second, I think for the guys who were really good players, I think the prospect of coaching guys who aren't as good as they were, specifically quarterbacks, I think that would drive them crazy.
I don't know. I mean,
not that it applies in Buffalo.
Is pretty expensive.
Josh Allen's better than Phillip Rivers.
Yeah.
I don't think that's any sort of hot take or any, crazy statement there. But last one for you before you let you go. Jesse Minter is the head coach in Baltimore. I liked the hire, but then that brings up another massive question of who will be Lamar Jackson's offensive coordinator. What have you heard on that front?
Look, I want to take it one step farther. I don't think it's a given Lamar Jackson's going to be back with the Ravens. We've been talking about this. We've been writing about it. Just because John Harbaugh was fired, it's not like Dan Reeves versus John Elway back in the early 90s when Pat Bowlen picked quarterback over coach. I think there's still a chance that Lamar Jackson decides it's time for a fresh start for him too. And he's got a ton of power in this situation. He's got 2 years left under contract. There's a no tag clause in his deal. So He walks away 2 years from now as a free agent if he wants to. They want to get him signed to an extension. All he has to say is, I'll take my $104 million over the next 2 years, and I'll go wherever I want. And there's a thought that he'd like to get back to Miami, and that would be a perfect time 2 years from now, because that's when the $99 million in dead money charge for Tua Tagovailoa disappears from their books. But I think we just need to see what is his thought about the Ravens not hiring an offensive specialist, maybe a former head coach who was available like a Mike McDaniel, and instead going with a first-time head coach, defensive specialist who Jackson knows because he was in Baltimore for 3 years, the first 3 years of Jackson's career. But because Jackson doesn't talk to anybody, he doesn't have an agent to talk to the media and say what he's thinking, we don't know what he's thinking. So I don't know that the offensive coordinator hire is going to be a big factor. I think the threshold question is, what does he think about Jesse Minter? If he likes it, it should be fine. If he doesn't, it may not be fine.